Hi VC, how's it going? I'm going to show some more recent vinyl pickups today. Like I say, I've got a fair few to get through and some decent stuff here. In fact, I've got at least two of what to me are Grails here. And what constitutes a Grail is a very personal thing. It's not always about value. Sometimes it's just about how difficult you've found it to pick something up. And there are two, probably three, in fact, albums here that I've been after for a long time. And I'll leave those till last. So if you want to see what they are, hang on in there. But we'll start off with a good one. And this is one I picked up again my local record fair. And the guy had 20 quid on it, which in great condition is a superb price for this album. But I looked at the disc, it's pretty dusty, fingerprints, couldn't really tell what the condition of the vinyl was under all the dirt. And I asked him if that was his best price, and he said, I'll have it for a tenner. And I wasn't going to argue with him. So I've been wanting this for quite a while. I think I checked out some of the songs online, but when I saw it, I couldn't quite remember what it sounded like, but I knew it was something I wanted. And it's Hard Meets Through a Window. This is their second album. The first one I don't have, and that's supposed to be a much heavier hard rock album. But despite the band name, this is a mellower affair. They kind of really embrace the acoustic guitars on this one. And it's sort of jammy, it's mellow, it's sort of bluesy, mildly proggy with some psych elements. There's a lot of acoustic guitar on here, which I think, from what I've read, is a bit of a departure from the first album. But it works nicely. I'm not going to claim this as some lost classic, but it is a decent album. I'm very glad to have it in my collection. I mean, it starts well. The first track, just called On the Road, and that's got a sort of snaking bass line, some really nice busy clattering drums, and a lot of meandering acidic wah-wah guitar. So it is it's a good opener. And then second track, New Day, has a sort of pastoral feel to it, and I suppose there are elements of Wishbone Ash in their sound. And some good harmonised lead vocals. There's again lots of acoustic guitar and some flute on here. So yeah, that's a nice tune, but probably the highlight for me on the first side, and the first side is the better side of the album, I think. Final track, Smile As You Go Under, is notable just for the really nice acidic backwards guitar solo that plays on the outro. Some really good stuff. The voice on here is serviceable. The songs aren't especially memorable, but then I'm probably doing it a disservice because I've not listened to it enough to really stick in my head anyway. But the impression I get is that they were looking for a style and hadn't quite stumbled on it. I think they split up after this album. So if they'd stuck with the more heavy-handed hard rock of the first album, perhaps they'd have had a better chance of being remembered more fondly. But this is good. I find it a little bit samey, but it's a decent listen, and certainly not one I regret buying, not for the tenner I paid for it. Always been quite intrigued by the artwork. Kind of gothic church windows with some kind of, don't know what that is, some Antarctic scenery through the window. And then you get a man holding a puppy. You can't go wrong with that. And these guys, I didn't say, were from Birmingham, England. I think this album came out in 1970, so it's competing with a lot of really top draw hard rock albums that year. So if it got lost in the crowd, it's hardly surprising. But decent album. Came on the green Warner label. And certainly if you can find it for a tenner, well worth picking up. It tends to go for a lot more than that. Now here's an album that came out in 1973. It's this band's fourth album. And I've got the first album, and I've never hugely warmed to it. I have to be in the mood for it, because it's very classically inspired prog, and it's a little bit leans too much towards the classical and too far away from the rock for my taste. And that's Beggar's Opera. Now the fourth album, Get Your Dog Off Me, which apart from being a terrible name for an album and rather strange album artwork, it's a complete departure in sound form, or pretty much complete. Looking at the lineup of instruments on here, you've still got harpsichord and mellotron and Moog and electric piano, all these sort of things mentioned on here, but their presence is far less obvious on this record than on their debut. I haven't heard the second and third album, so I can't comment on those, but by the time they released this, they had changed direction pretty abruptly. This is an odd sort of mix of almost southern rock with boogie elements. And the classical feel of the first album has been left far behind, all apart from perhaps on second track on side 2, I think it's the second track, Sweet Blossom Woman, which features harpsichord and that kind of thing. So it has a few nods to their original sound. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what they were trying to do with this. They were out of Glasgow. Like I say, they started off being extremely prog, perhaps a little too prog for my taste, which is saying something because I do love my prog. But yeah, 73 did this come out, did I say? 73 or 74. Probably the perfect point to go even more prog, because that's when prog was really taking off, and they went in the opposite direction and went for a slightly more generic boogie rock sound. It's not without its merits, this album, and in some ways I prefer it to the debut just because I don't like the debut that much. But yeah, again, it was a cheap pickup. I shall give it a few more listens and see if it grows on me. But yeah, I can't say I hugely recommend it. There you go, it's on the Vertigo Spaceship label. So far I'm not exactly dumping a whole load of praise on these records, but bear in mind they're new pickups for me, and I've not had a chance to really get my head around them yet. Yeah, a couple of listens at most. So some of these things may go up in my estimation, and certainly the Hard Meat album, I do really enjoy it, so I'm interested to see how that one pans out when I've given it a few more spins. And continuing the theme of albums that I bought and don't rate very highly, which is a fairly strange way to start this video, I know, but this is one that always gets described as a psych in any listing that you see. And I was always a bit sceptical about that sort of description. But when I saw this really, really cheap, I mean, £1 or something I think I paid for this, I thought, yeah, now's the time to find out what's really like. And it's the Tea Set and Ma Belle Amie. And, you know, it's, looking at that, it's got a real period feel to the artwork. They're called the Tea Set, so I'm immediately thinking it's going to be psych pop or perhaps bubblegum. The back picture kind of confirms that feeling. But these guys, they were a Dutch band. This came out in 1970. And what it is just period pop. There are no psych elements whatsoever on this that I can find. I've made notes here on a few tracks, and I'll just read out what I've put about them. Track 2 on the first side, What Can I Do? It's like an up-tempo version of the Animals with horns and clarinet and some gruff vocals. So that's probably a bit of a highlight, to be honest. Track I Don't Want to Know Charmaine, or perhaps it's just I Don't Want to Know. Next track's called Charmaine, I don't know. Is a bit loungy. I'll put here, it's sort of cabaret bossa nova pop, which is your thing. You're welcome to it, because it does nothing for me. Then, the track Charmaine is Charmaine. I've put here, it's an awful ballad that you could imagine being the Dutch Eurovision entry in 1972 or something. It's goddamn awful. Finally in Love Again is a slightly sort of 60s Bee Gees sounding mid-tempo piano ballad with congas and maracas, and it's okay for what it is. Side 2 starts with a track which is more period pop with sort of Tijuana brass horns punctuating the chorus. Then you've got a track called Here in My House, which is played in sort of waltz time with a Wurlitzer and sort of sub-Robin Gibb vocal. Elsewhere you've got kitchen sink orchestration, a few zany time changes, but no psych whatsoever. So don't be fooled. I'm providing a service for you here. Don't be tempted to buy it to see if it's psych, or because you've been told it's psych, because it isn't. It's an okay 60s pop album that is nothing to write home about. Comes on the Colossus label there, which of all sorts is a very attractive label. Not sure it's always in black and white like that. It doesn't say it's a promo copy, but yeah, certainly black and white label there. So yeah, the tea set from 1970. Okay, now we get on to the good stuff. If you haven't already switched off because of my negativity for the first 3 or 4 albums there, here's one that I do love. I bought this from the same guy who sold me that Hard Meat album, and again, 10 quid for double Curtis live album. Now this is really special. I love a bit of Curtis Mayfield. I think he was a huge talent. Generally not a guy who's into a lot of soul or funk, but if it's real quality soul and funk, I'm right on it. And Curtis's guitar playing, his voice, his social conscience, all of that just really draw me to his records. And sometimes I avoid live albums because I just think, well, do I really need what are often substandard versions of studio tracks? But that's not the case here. On this, all the orchestration that sometimes comes close to overpowering his studio records is stripped away, and it's just him and a tight as anything band playing at the Bitter End, which was a pretty tiny club in New York. And you can hear every word the audience is saying between songs, and they are so involved in the performance. And the performance is amazing. You know, it's conga overload on here. There's the band for you. So yeah, double album. I say some great musicianship here. The band is really tight, really some instinctive playing. And I can't recommend this highly enough. Really, really great stuff. And it's got some out-and-out classics here. People Get Ready, We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue, and Don't Worry If There's Hell Below, We're All Going to Go. Can't go wrong with Curtis Mayfield. You definitely can't go wrong with this album. And it's a very different experience to the studio albums. So check it out. The guy was, an absolute legend. Curtis Mayfield. And next I've got a record that I've been after for a long time, and to be honest, I've been wanting it as much for the sleeve art as for the music. I think musically this is a fantastic band, but it's one of those ones I'd have bought whether or not I like the music, just because I love the sleeve art so much. And it's one that, here in the UK at least, you just never see. And I did buy this online, and again, I got this cheap. So pleased to have got it as cheap as I did. and Wet Willie's debut. And like I say, I've always loved that artwork. Perhaps that says more about me than I'd really want to let on, but I just love that kind of slightly gross out, weird artwork. I don't know who the artist was on this, but it reminds me a bit of the artwork on the Blood Rot USA album. And this is still in the shrink. And considering it's an original pressing from 71, someone was never very keen to see what was in the gatefold. So I'm going to take it off now, because I'm not a huge fan of shrink wrap. Cool, I like that. So there you go, Wet Willie. And I can actually see the song titles in the right order now, because they're out of order on the back sleeve. So yeah, great album, great sleeve. And what's it sound like? Well, they're from Alabama, so definitely got that sort of southern feel to them. I guess closest comparisons would be the Rolling Stones around the time of Exile on Main Street or Goat's Head Soup. There's definitely a big feel of early J. Giles Band on here. And if you only know the J. Giles Band from Centerfold, that's not what I'm talking about. Early J. Giles Band, but a really funky, bluesy R&B band. Tight as they come. Absolutely incredible stuff. You know, buy any of the first 5 or 6 J. Giles Band albums and you will be surprised if you've not heard them. So yeah, they've got a feel of a J. Giles Band. They've got some Black Crowes kind of vibe to them as well. And this is really great stuff. It's bluesy, southern barroom rock, but it's done with such panache and with a real original take on it. It's just interesting from beginning to end. I suppose the only poor track on here, and it's not even poor, it's just not quite as involving as the rest, is what's it called? Shame, Shame, Shame. Third track on the second side, which is sort of good time honky tonking bar blues. It's just a bit generic. For anyone else, it'd be a decent tune, but on the strength of what else is on this album, it just lets the side down a little bit. But, you know, highlights here. Track Dirty Leg is a hypnotic groover with some great sort of Hammond and harmonica interplay. Elsewhere, there's some great piano ballads. Vocals are great. It's got Jimmy Hall who sings. He's very similar to Peter Wolf from the J. Giles Band. There's a bit of a nod to ZZ Top. Certainly the opening riff of Rock and Roll Band on side 2 reminded me of ZZ Top a lot. Some great soulful vocals on Pieces, second track on side 2. Some haunting harmonica on that. Tasteful guitar lines. Big gospel style backing vocals. It is just beautiful. And then what else we got? I mean, this album doesn't sort of peter out as it goes on, believe me. Probably the last 2 tracks are my favourites on here. Beggar Song. It's funky, has a mellow groove, loads of electric piano, some nice church organ. Great stuff. On that track, the vocalist reminds me of Paul Young. Not that Paul Young, not Wherever I Lay My Hat Paul Young, but Paul Young, who was the singer in Sad Cafe. And I think they're sort of a bit shunned these days. I think they're very unfashionable when they had a few hits in the UK in the sort of tail end of the 70s. But songs like My Oh My, Paul Young's voice was really raunchy and really involving, and that's kind of what the vocals sound like on that track. And then finishes with Fool on You, which is just a stunning track. Almost has a Riders on the Storm feel to the outro. I mean, it's an 8-minute track, so it builds and then it kind of, you know, lets you down gently with this beautiful sort of sax and tinkling piano. Beautiful, really atmospheric. So I've got 3 or 4 of Wet Willie's albums now, and out of the ones I've got, this is by far the best, and they're all good. But Wet Willie's debut from 71, well worth picking up. Really good album. And if I can get another one just to stick the cover on the wall, I'll do that. Now we're on the home straight and we're getting to the Grails. So this one I'm going to call the Grail because for me it is. I mean, if you're prepared to shell out for it, it's probably easy enough to pick up. But yeah, I was delighted to find this at Shacks in Kingston. Great album. This is an album that I bought when it came out on CD back in 2000. Never saw it on vinyl at the time. I mean, it was pressed on vinyl, but in very small quantities, I imagine. And I played this and played this and played this and absolutely loved it. And it's Lost Souls by Doves, who probably my favourite Manchester band, to be honest, because this is just such a spectacularly good album. The band grew out of another band called Sub Sub, who had a big hit at the end of the 90s with Ain't No Love and Ain't No Use, which is a real sort of disco house fun banger of a tune. And it just had one hit wonder written all over it. And apparently the band, their studio burnt down and they took a moment to reappraise and thought they wanted to do some more serious music. And thank God they did, because this, to me, is probably the best album released in the year 2000. I'd have to go and have a look what other albums were released in 2000. But off the top of my head, I can't think of anything that does it for me more than this one. It sounds to me like an acid trip. This is a deeply psychedelic album. Sides A and B are fully psychedelic for me. The vocals are heavily processed. We're definitely deep in the midst of a trip on the first 2 sides. Then side C, it feels like the acid is wearing off. Things are still sort of shimmering at the edges, but it's sort of settling down a fair bit. And then side D, dawn is approaching and the chill out begins. It's a proper clubbers album, this one is. But it's a clubbers album, but it's a rock album. And that's what I love about it. The fact that they captured the spirit of those sort of warehouse parties in the 90s, but did it as a rock band. Hope that makes sense. But this is such a special album. Starts off with tracks which is pretty much instrumental, very sort of cinematic and atmospheric. You've got Ringo-style drums on here in places. You've got touches of Stone Roses and Air. There's an ethereal feel to a lot of the tunes. Some great circular guitar motifs. Heavenly choirs, Rhodes piano, acoustic guitar, touch of Air, the French band Air in their sound occasionally. There's elements of dub, but it all adds to the trippiness. You know, the echo and reverb are to the max, certainly on the first 2 sides of this album. Like I say, when you get to the 3rd side, and you get tracks like Catch the Sun, which if it wasn't a big hit, it should have been, and it probably was a floor filler at every student disco in the early 2000s. Total crowd pleaser. Noisy, atmospheric, melodic, euphoric. It's got everything. There's a touch of Calexico in places. I've put down here the track C3, which is The Man Who Told Everything, is like a Manc Calexico. You know, it's chilled, it's intimate but lush, Fantastic stuff. And then you get onto side 4, side D, and yeah, you're getting lots of sort of phase guitar and harmonica. And the first track on side 4, which is the Cedar Room, it almost sounds like a half-speed The Edge from U2, jamming with Oasis on acid. That's what it says in my notes anyway, so it must be true. And it's just beautiful. That's followed by a brief instrumental, and then finishes with a track called A House, which is all folky guitar. It's like a Manchester Steve Earle almost. And there's the sound of crackling flames in the background places, which I think is them referencing the fact their studio had burnt down. So yeah, there's a lot to get your head around. I've been listening to this album for years. I still can't fully take it all in, but it is a brilliant listen. And it comes on this, I think, very limited silvery grey vinyl. And the pressing is fantastic. I think part of the reason I hadn't wanted to really shell out on this is because I'd read, admittedly, one review where someone was criticising the pressing and saying it sounds like crap and, you know, hold out for an original. But the fact that originals never come up, and every other review said this is one of the best sounding records in my collection, I thought, yeah, I've got to go for it. And damn, am I glad I did. So that's another Grail ticked off the list. Dove's Lost Souls. Brilliant, brilliant album. Now, Grail number 2 is one that I had to get off a cello in Sweden, because I never see copies in the UK. Getting anything posted from the States is just too expensive these days. So, yeah, I bit the bullet. It's always a risk because you never know what condition things are going to turn up in, either damaged in transit or just poorly described in the first place. But this seller looked trustworthy, and this is a great copy of a great album, and it's the album by Stark Naked on RCA Victor, which came out in 1971. And yeah, to say I've been after this for a long time is an understatement. Absolutely love this album. Weird old album artwork there, some face made up of various intertwined women's figures by the looks of it. And there's the band on the back. And this came out on Dynaflex. Got the original Dynaflex inner sleeve there. And of course, as we know, Dynaflex are pretty flimsy. Always worry that they're not going to play well. Most people seem to worry about that. But to be honest, the Dynaflex records I've got play brilliantly. And this is no exception. There's some noise which I think is down to the pressing, not down to any damage between tracks. But while the music's playing, it sounds fantastic. Big, fat, beefy sounding piece of vinyl. So what's it like? Well, it's perhaps not as heavy as you might be expecting it to be, although at times it is. Certainly the first track, All of Them Witches, which is nearly 9 minutes long, has a touch of sort of Jethro Tull's Aqualung, with a bit of Atomic Rooster thrown in, but with piano rather than organ, sort of driving it along. It's definitely heavy prog. The vocal melody tends to follow the riff quite closely, and I know for some people that's a bit of a no-no. They like a melody to float over the top. But being as much of a Black Sabbath fan as I am, and an Aussie fan, I have no problem with that. I think it just reinforces the riff sometimes. See, it's a simple guitar riff, and like I said, the vocal follows it really closely. But there's some nice touches like some really beautiful female backing vocals, which give it sort of a West Coast psych feel, and brilliant fuzz guitar on there as well. Second track, Done, is sort of a piano-led brooder. And piano is a big thing on this album. It never feels like it's wimping out. It's just a nice little sort of, I don't know, it's just a nice little sound to add to their palette, I suppose. The vocals on the second track are very, very similar to David Byron from Uriah Heep. There's a slight sort of classical feel to that second song. Perhaps that's just because of the piano on it, I don't know. But yeah, really nice one. And if fuzz bass is your thing, it doesn't get much fuzzier than the third track, Sins. It's big, fat, farting fuzz bass riff. It's got a female lead vocal, this one. And the riff is kind of similar to You Really Got Me by the Kinks. The whole thing is raucous and echoey. Some great shredding guitar and sort of Hendrix, Frank Marino style. And yeah, drums just drive this one along. And side 2 starts off with an 11-minute track. Again, it's got a really evocative piano intro, which leads into a sort of a guitar and drum groove. Those West Coast style male-female vocal harmonies are on here again. And the track is kind of simple and repetitive, but that just provides a real sort of great bedrock for the guitar to solo over. And it becomes really hypnotic, and you don't feel like it's an 11-minute track. You know, it's almost over too soon. Superb stuff. And then Wasted Time, second track on side 2. Again, it's got that kind of slightly West Coasty feel, I suppose. An introspective male vocal, lots of piano, some gorgeous vocal harmonies. And the keyboards have that kind of Pink Floyd, Rick Wright feel to them, most definitely. It's a real dreamy, drifting track. And then you come to the final track, Iceberg, which again has that kind of heavy Jethro Tull, Aqualung sort of feel to it, real heavy psychedelic prog track. It's another simple riff with echo-drenched guitar solo. And I love this album. It's so of its time, but that's not criticism, because I love this era of music. 1971 produced some amazing music, and it's one of those records that straddles hard rock and psychedelia and that kind of West Coast feel. It's a beautiful album. Then last but most definitely not least, another Grail. Again, this is one I've had on a not particularly well produced CD for a number of years, and it's been top of my want list for a long time. And it's a band called Troika, and their self-titled album on the Cotillion label, which you can see there. And these guys were, I think they're from the States, but they were of Russian origin, or at least looking at the band names. The bass player, Ruma Lukovietsky, was of Russian origin, and that really reflects in the music, which gives this album such an unusual feel. It opens up with an introduction which just sounds like Russian folk music, like balalaika, although it credits mandolin on the back of the sleeve rather than balalaika, but it's definitely played to sound like a Russian balalaika. And then it goes into fuzz guitar with sort of macho vocals and sort of out and out heaviness. And then we get a track called Early Morning, which is all sensitive guitar picking and wind chimes and shimmering cymbals. And you get kind of this clock-like drum sound with just sticks playing on the rim of the snare drum. And it almost turns into like this motoric krautrock version of Genesis, Peter Gabriel era Genesis is the best way I can describe it. And with that kind of constant click, 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 click on the snaring, you feel like you're listening to the track while you're trapped inside a cuckoo clock. It's an odd track, and it's a really interesting track. And it just shows this band was doing their own thing. They weren't copying anybody else, that's for sure. This is a really unusual and interesting album, and I love it. Elsewhere, there's sort of more krautrock elements and a fair bit of Hendrix-style guitar. Some really nice grooves. There's psychedelia, there's jazzy elements, great bass lines. Some of it's instrumental, some of it is sung, and when it is sung, it's one of those albums where the vocal doesn't seem to be the same on any two tracks because they use vocals as another instrument. There's track Rubber Dub Dub, Troika in a Tub. I mean, just the title shows you these guys had a sense of humour. But that track's like a sped up bluesy Hendrix with another weird vocal and backing vocals. And the side finishes off with 30 seconds of what sounds like a Russian work song. And yeah, it's not terribly fashionable to be Russian at the moment. Not that I think there's much wrong with your average Russian, just with the guy they got in charge, but yeah, they don't downplay the Russian heritage on here. Again, side 2 starts with a bit of Russian folk music, then segues straight into this sort of medieval madrigal guitar and a loose, sloppy riff, and a bit of a Captain Beefheart style vocal. So yeah, this album it's all over the place. There's a track, what is it? Dear Margaret, I think it's called, which has a kind of guitar, bass and mandolin sort of intertwining riff. And it sounds like a Cossack-style spaghetti western soundtrack with sort of wordless Slavic vocals. All so good. I mean, the thing is, the weird elements on this album don't override the musicality and the sort of early 70s heavy psychedelic hard rockness of it, if you like. So don't be put off by all this mention of mandolins and Slavic chanting, because that's just one element in this whole Troika stew. There's definitely a sense of humour at work here on this album. And like I say, these guys, they just did this one album. And don't know what happened to them afterwards. I need to look into that. But this is a great album. One of those ones I thought, I'm never going to get a copy of this, because, I mean, how many copies of this sold in the UK? Well, obviously this one. Not sure how many others, but really chuffed to have it. And definitely one that's worth checking out for any of you who are into a bit of early 70s psychedelic hard rock. Really, really good stuff. So there you go. Recent vinyl pickups and 3 Grails.